Hey everyone! Hope you're ready to learn some more writing tips. Last video I talked a bit about writing details and picking the right details and not picking generic details. Today I'm going to talk about 3 tweaks that can really keep your details interesting because our stories need details so people are immersed into this world, but we don't want to get it to the point that it's boring, right? We don't want to put in these details that are boring. At the time of this post, the 6 months previous to this, I'd learned a few things about writing scenes, and specifically the techniques that are in this video that came from this post are some things that you can put here and there to make it more interesting, make your scene more interesting, and to keep it from going still. I think of them as you expand your details, you deepen your details, and you put details, whatever your descriptions, in motion. As some of you know, I work for David Farland, and so his writing tips and lessons obviously have an impact on me. He's a writer, if you're not familiar with him. He's a New York Times best-selling fantasy writer, and he writes science fiction too, and historical fiction. Anyway, that's not the point. One of his writing tips really led me to come up with the content of this vlog or this post. And this is just kind of like a little hypothesis of mine that has kind of developed over time. So in one of his writing workshops, Dave talks about how in Hollywood, filmmakers never want to use the same set twice, if they can help it. I mean, obviously financially it's more expensive, but I mean, I'm thinking about like the big blockbuster shows and stuff. So, you know, in one scene, the protagonist will be in a hotel, in another, he'll be on a boat, and another in an alley. So, even if the film takes place in, like, the same castle the whole movie, they will try to put each scene in a different part of the castle. Like, one might be in the dungeons, one's in the tower, one's in the entrance hall. We can do this with our scenes in our novels, too. Instead of having 3 scenes in our protagonist's kitchen, maybe we want to see if we can move one to a coffee shop and another to the zoo. By having each scene take place somewhere different, we not only keep the setting interesting and fresh, but we are expanding our setting. We are making our protagonist's world feel bigger. Obviously, this isn't a rule that all stories should adhere to. Some scenes need to happen in the same room, and using repeated settings can create internal resonance or create like a sense of history, like I talked about in some of my other videos, and cultivate nostalgia. Almost all of Harry Potter takes place at Hogwarts, and readers just kind of love returning to it. So not all stories need to have something different all the time. With that said, keep in mind that how many different rooms and places, keep in mind just in Hogwarts, think of how many different rooms and places that Harry still goes to at Hogwarts. I mean, it's big and it's varied. But Dave's advice on setting crossed paths with a few other things that were going on in my own writing at the time, and I soon realized that the advice doesn't just apply to setting. I started seeing a lot of other ways to expand and deepen scenes. So that's what I'm here to talk about. And like I mentioned with Dave's writing tip, the following are not rules that every scene and every story should adhere to. These are just techniques to consider, and they're great to turn to if the details in your scene feel stagnant. Okay, so the first one is expanding, right? So you can, what I would call micro expand settings. So you already have a setting, like, I already have a bit of setting down. You can expand your setting by putting scenes in different places. Great, you know, we've talked about that. But remember how I said that not every story should follow that rule? Well, if you have multiple scenes happening in the same place, you can still expand that place. Say, what? Yes, it's all about the details, okay? As most writers have probably figured out, if you try to describe everything that's in a room, for example, in your story's pacing is going to go so slow it dies. We don't want to describe every single thing in a room. It's not important to the story. Even if it's a great description, it will get boring. So instead, we describe enough of it to get a good picture and a good feel of the place. But here's how to expand it. Every time your character goes back into that room, you can mention a new little detail, or a few, can be more than one, about it. So the first scene that takes place in the room, let's say it's a bedroom, since I'm in mine, you might describe the overall layout, some important pieces of furniture, then you'll want to mention some details that tell us something about the place and the character who lives there. Like in my room, I have point shoes from ballet hanging up. That's a detail that tells people about me. On my nightstand, I have this vase of Poseidon I got from going to Poseidon's temple in Greece. That's another interesting detail. Near my window, there's this crack, and one time I woke up in the night and heard a mouse in it. Kind of freaky. So we have some interesting details, but I have way too much stuff in my room to describe all in one scene. But the next time I write about a scene in my room, I might mention a few different things. I'll expand it. So, I might say, now, on my wall, I have a picture of Jesus done by an artist who's named Del Parson. I took an art class from him in college, and he signed the back of the painting for me. And so that tells people a little bit more about me, right? I like to do art. I took a class. I'm Christian. So on top of my wardrobe, I have all the Harry Potter books lined up. On my dresser, I have some cute little chicken figurines. Anyway, so the idea here is that I add those details the next time I'm in that scene. Then, the third time a scene takes place in my room, I could mention some more details, right? Well, I have loads of pillows on my bed. I have this Michael Jackson nesting doll, and I have family pictures. So every time I write a scene in my room, I could expand my room a little bit. Okay, now some of you might be thinking now, wait a second, then the reader won't be able to keep your setting straight. Well, yes, that's true if I only described completely new things every time. You'll want some what I think of them as anchor items, or like tags. Usually we call them tags with characters. Every time I write about my room, I can mention my desk and my pet bird Johnny. Right? Those could be the tags. We want to mention some of the same items regularly. So, for example, in Harry Potter, almost every time someone goes to number 12 Grimmauld Place, J.K. Rowling mentions them almost running into, knocking over, or tripping over this troll leg umbrella stand. And she also mentions the talking, which I guess is really more screaming, portrait of Mrs. Black. So those things I think of as anchors. They're anchoring us to number 12 Grimmauld Place. They stay consistent. But in addition to your anchors, you can add some new details to expand the place. We learn something new about it every time, and maybe by the end of the book, we have the whole room described. Well, guess what? This isn't something that just works with setting. It can work with other things too. You can expand your characters physically, how they look physically. So we can use the same technique to describe our characters, right? Like I said. Again, we don't want to describe every single feature of our character all in one sitting. That's just too much. So first, we might describe the dominating physical features, the mustache, or a mole, or a missing finger, right? Like I talked about, the right details, the things that stand out, that are probably going to be our anchors, okay, or tags. But then, through each scene the character is in, we can expand it. We can describe their neck, their chin, their back, their waist, their hips, their lips, their ears, their nose, their fingernails, their voice, and the list goes on. And so, over the course of the book, we may have accumulated a pretty thorough description of a character. Again, we want those anchoring features. Harry Potter's green eyes, jet black hair, glasses, and of course his lightning-shaped scar are all anchors Rowling uses when describing him. Those features anchor us to the physical part of Harry. They're also the dominating features, meaning they are what distinguish him physically as Harry the most. They are the features that stand out. Okay, now you can expand characters internally. So, surprise. This also works with the internal makeup of a character. Again, we have those anchoring internal features, which are the dominating features of that character. Maybe your character is the Queen of Sarcasm. but loyalty is very important to her, and she's very superstitious. So those might be her anchors, the dominant, consistent parts of her character. They'll play into her voice in every scene. But in every scene she's in, we might just learn one more little tidbit about her internal makeup. It could be something small, like a like or a dislike. We learn she doesn't like chocolate. It could be something mentioned from her history. She once got into an argument with her mom about religion that frayed their relationship. It could be another characteristic that's not prominent. Maybe she can be a bit self-indulgent. It's not a dominant trait, but it's there. So we are expanding our characters throughout the book. Okay, and you have to make these things flow, right? With expansion, we don't want to get carried away and just throw in expanding details wherever, however. We don't want to force the fact that our queen of sarcasm hates chocolate into a scene. We don't want it to sound random or out of place or out of the blue. The details you use need to flow into the story seamlessly. We could mention our character doesn't like chocolate when her friends offer her some. We don't want to throw it in there when she's scuba diving, unless we can find a way to do that so it makes it relevant to what's going on so that it flows. So likewise, I wouldn't want to mention the fact that I have a Michael Jackson nesting doll on my shelf if I have the lights in my room off and I'm trying to fall asleep unless my thoughts are naturally wandering to it. You want to give it variety. You don't want to rely on expanding only your character's likes and dislikes through the whole story, right? Unless that is relevant to your character and story. For example, if you have a character who defines himself by his likes and dislikes, that would be fine. But if you did this, that would be a little ridiculous to have that be the only way you're expanding. Instead, pick a bit of history for one expansion, a dislike for another, a mention of a dream job in another. This will flesh out your expansions. Okay, so you can use expansions in other aspects too. You can expand your novel's theme. If I'm writing about how love conquers all, I might start exploring the theme with a parent-child relationship and then mention how it relates to a romantic relationship later as an expansion. So you want to look around and explore and see what else you can expand in your story through these scenes. Can you expand relationship? What can you do with this? Alright, guys, so getting a little low on time here, so I'll pick up with the next section, this next week, which will be, we talked about expanding, so next we're going to talk about deepening, and we'll go into that and how you can use that in your writing. So, follow, subscribe, all those good things. Thank you very much, and happy writing!